here I was in the life I had anticipated for myself. But instead of being this happy, satisfied, contented person, I was tired all the time now. Not just episodes of fatigue, but now it's like constant exhaustion. I was overwhelmed by the responsibilities of motherhood. It just felt like someone always needed me for something. Like, and anyone who's had kids knows that, and it can be draining. And I love my kids, but it was just so noisy. And so like I would go through these cycles of being like really motivated, and I'm going to get everything together. I'm going to organize their little dressers with their baby clothes, and like I'm going to clean up the house, and I'm going to have dinner ready when my husband gets home, right? And I'd start doing one thing and then end up doing something else. And then a baby's crying and I got to go help the baby. And then the brother is screaming he needs help with his shoes, and I go do that. And I like all day long, just not feeling like I'm accomplishing anything. And so I just never really had the time or the mindfulness to realize I needed to take care of myself. Those were skills that I'm learning now. And I've since learned that women with ADHD are often diagnosed with depression before they learn that they have ADHD.
ADHD Rewired, episode 368. This is the podcast for those of us with really good intentions and a slightly wandering attention. I'm Erika Tivers. I'm a licensed clinical social worker by training and a coach by design. I'm your host, and I have ADHD. ADHD Rewired is more than just a podcast. We are a community. We are wired for connection, and you are not alone. Go to ADHDrewired.com to learn how you can join us in our free secret Facebook group. Get additional resources for every episode, including links to any resources we mention on today's show. You can support us on Patreon, sign up for our email newsletter. You can request podcast postcards to distribute to your clients and support groups, and you can learn all about our intensive online video-based coaching and accountability groups. You can do all of this at our website, ADHDrewired.com. We know that starting is the hardest part, so let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of ADHD Rewired. Today's guest is Erika Hopkins. Erika is a professional educator and aspiring author who lives with her husband and 3 boys in Idaho. She holds a Master's of Education degree in secondary science, a Bachelor's of Nutrition Science, and a minor in chemistry. Debilitated by chronic fatigue attributed to depression, Erika relinquished her idea that mothers should remain in the home, and she took a job at the local high school where the process of science and an unlikely friendship challenged Erika's views of herself and the world, ultimately leading to the discovery that she has been living with undiagnosed ADHD. Erika, welcome to the podcast.
I'm grateful to be here. Thank you.
So you have a really, really interesting story. One that I think is, we're on episode 360 something at the time of this recording. And I think a big part of this story is a unique one on the podcast, which is, just kind of exciting and really interesting. So can we kind of just start this off by sharing what was the experience that led to the transformation of you sort of questioning kind of everything you know?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in southeastern Idaho in a very religious community. I was brought up in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I loved it. And through that religion, I learned that God had a plan for me and for my life, and that if I followed it, I would be happy. So I really clung to that idea, that promise. I was loyally obedient and very careful to avoid any information that would go against what this particular church teaches. I loved growing up that way. I loved my faith community. I loved participating in a very intensive youth training program that kind of is where I internalized that my role in life was to be a wife and a mother. And I needed to marry a righteous priesthood holder, which would be a man of this particular faith, and then also to bear children and raise them the way that I was raised. And so this was my plan, and this is what I was going to do to be happy. That was what I was told, to be happy. So I grew up that way, and then while I was waiting for the happily ever after part, I went to college and to find a husband, right? I mean, that's why a lot of girls go to college. There was plenty of prospects, but I found the one I wanted, and he was still young. And in our culture, the young men need to go on a mission for 2 years to teach the beliefs of our church before they're able to marry honorably. And so I waited for him while he did that. And then while he was gone, I studied, and I was curious about the natural world. I always loved science. And I really benefited from kind of that methodical approach to learning. It was very much a process, and very much you keep track of things. And of course, at the time, I didn't know that ADHD was a problem for me, or a strength, I guess, depending on how you look at it, as I'm learning to look at it that way even more now. But the method and the process of science was really appealing to me and helped me keep track of what I was learning. But there are certain areas of science that can be challenging to those who have religious beliefs. And so my parents helped guide me to decide on a science-related major that would be acceptable and that would be a good job for a mom. And the reasoning was, in case something happened to my husband and I needed to work outside the home. But the expectation was that I would not work outside of the home, because the place for women is in the home, caring for the children. And so I decided on pharmacy.
Just to clarify, is so that was your belief, or is that still your belief?
That was,
okay.
Yeah,
okay.
That was the
I'm just
belief.
like imagining all like the feminists listening right now, like even like listening to this myself right now, knowing your story a bit. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, and you really genuine, like that was a very genuine like belief that you had.
100%. I applied to school. Was a really good environment for me. I did well in school. It was very structured. It was very lots of things to learn about and very interesting to me, and it kept my attention. And so I did well in school. I was a straight A student. I was valedictorian. I got into some Ivy League schools, and unfortunately, fortunately, I mean, there's always two ways to look at everything, right? But I didn't go there. And part of it was my mom thought that I would not find the type of man or boy that would be appropriate to marry for me. And so I actually went somewhere closer to home, and I loved it. College, it was great. But the major we decided on that would be okay for a woman was in science was pharmacy. So we figured that I could work just a few days a week and make good money. And most of the time I could still be home with my kids, because the belief was that the mother is primarily responsible for the nurture of her children. And that was where she needed to be. And I believe that wholeheartedly. I actually wrote on my scholarship application that my greatest aspiration in life was to be a wife and mother. And that was my passion. That was my goal. So at school, I studied pharmacy for a while I was waiting for my man to get back. And the more I learned in my classes, the more dissatisfied I became with really the whole idea of pharmacy school, because I I wanted to prevent illness, and I was learning how to just divvy out all of these medications to cover up symptoms of illness. And I thought, well, maybe, we should be improving our lifestyles. We should be looking at our environment. We should be trying to get to the root of the cause. And so I switched my major to nutrition science. And I studied the body and health and preventative medicine, essentially. And I got a degree in nutrition science. And the passion for wellness, it was really inspired by my own history of poor health. So throughout childhood and adolescence, I had kind of what we thought were seemingly unpredictable episodes of just staggering fatigue and trouble concentrating. Okay. And these things were random, or seemed to be random at the time. It was hard to wake up in the mornings, and I often needed naps in the afternoon. And so my mom took me to dozens and dozens of doctors trying to figure out what was wrong with me, right? What's wrong with me? Why can't I keep up? Like, why am I so tired all the time? And why are all my friends able to do so many things and go to these parties and they're okay and they still have energy, right? So I felt a lot of shame over that. I just felt different. And eventually we learned that I had hypoglycemia, among other things that we learned later, but I struggled to maintain that condition and deal with the low blood glucose challenges. But it was hard to remember when and decide what to eat. And I just felt, I don't know, especially as it persisted through college, I felt really frustrated with myself, because here I am studying nutrition, and I know that my body has a hard time managing its levels, and still I can't figure out a way to eat consistently throughout the day. And that was just very frustrating to me. And so these episodes continued. I missed big events and I missed examinations because of the overwhelm and the fatigue, and I had poor sleep. And my way of dealing with that, even though I knew that it wasn't good for my body, I kind of self-medicated with sweets, sugar and candy and baked goods and things like that, because coffee and tea were against my religion. You're not allowed to drink coffee or tea. And so sugar was my drug of choice. And that's a very common thing in this particular area. But it was just another one of those things that I felt like I know better, but I can't do better. And I don't know why. Right? So in 2010, my soon-to-be husband came home, and after 2 months, we got married. And I graduated from college. I spent one summer at home waiting to get pregnant, because I knew that was my next step in life. But then I felt so unfulfilled, and we didn't have a baby on the way yet. So I decided to go back and do graduate school and become a high school science teacher, because it's still science-y-ish, but also still one of those occupations that is considered acceptable for a woman and for a mom, right? Because your schedule will match that of your kids, and you still be home with them during the summers. And anyway, so that was my rationale for deciding on teaching. And so the next few years were a bit of a whirlwind. I delivered our first son the week before finals of completing my coursework. And then I delivered a second son 14 months later. And then I did my student teaching while I was pregnant with our third son. And he was born in 2014. So within 3 years, I was at 25 years old. I had my husband, and I had 2 degrees, and I had 3 babies in diapers.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Oh my gosh is an understatement. But I mean, that was it. That was it for the plan. We did, when we first got married, we did want to have 4 babies in all a year apart. That was because my husband and I both had 4 or came from families of 4 kids, and his siblings were all a year apart, and they loved it. They loved being close. They loved going to high school together. And so I thought, yeah, that's a great idea. But after the 3rd one, I kind of had this moment like, oh, this is really hard. I'm really, really tired. And something terrible happened. I was diagnosed with depression. But that's not the terrible part. The terrible part is that I was depressed, which means I was unhappy, right? Which means that according to my understanding of my purpose in life and God's plan, it meant that I had failed. Because if I wasn't happy, like it just didn't make sense. I had done everything I was supposed to do. I still was a faithful churchgoer. I supported my husband in his callings. He held a very prominent leadership position that required a lot of his time away from home. And so I handled a lot of the stuff at home all by myself. But that I always knew that was expected of me. And here I was in the life I had anticipated for myself. But instead of being this happy, satisfied, contented person, I was tired all the time now. Not just episodes of fatigue, but now it's like constant exhaustion. I was overwhelmed by the responsibilities of motherhood. It just felt like someone always needed me for something. Like, and anyone who's had kids knows that, and it can be draining. And I love my kids, but it was just so noisy. And so like I would go through these cycles of being like really motivated, and I'm going to get everything together. I'm going to organize their little dressers with their baby clothes, and like I'm going to clean up the house, and I'm going to have dinner ready when my husband gets home, right? And I'd start doing one thing and then end up doing something else. And then a baby's crying and I got to go help the baby. And then the brother is screaming he needs help with his shoes, and I go do that. And I like all day long, just not feeling like I'm accomplishing anything.
Sounds almost suffocating.
Oh, yes. Yes. And so I just never really had the time or the mindfulness to realize I needed to take care of myself. Those were skills that I'm learning now. And I've since learned that women with ADHD are often diagnosed with depression before they learn that they have ADHD.
So this is sort of the catalyst. This after you have your 3rd child and you're really struggling, which leads to kind of the next part of the story that we're going to get to after this break. So we will be right back. Support for ADHD reWired comes from our coaching community. It's hard to believe that we are nearing the end of March. We just wrapped up our 23rd season last week, and what an amazing season it's been. But our coaching and accountability groups don't stop here, as we are starting up again next month in April. Now, if you missed our registration event last Thursday, but are still itching to get your ADHD rewired this spring, then I have good news for you. There are still a couple of spots left, and we want you. Go to coachingrewired.com and click on the green button to receive the instructions on how you can still register for our 24th season of intensive online coaching and and accountability groups. And if we get enough people who are still interested, we have a new wonderful coach that I would love for all of you to meet. And we will make that announcement either by email or possibly next week on the podcast, depending on how many people express their interest by going to coachingrewired.com. Every season, our coaching members work together and learn how to ask better questions, plan their days, weeks, and months, and discover for themselves that they are not alone. Our coaching and accountability groups aren't just about the skills. It's about how we can all work together to thrive with our ADHD. So whether you're new to this podcast or you've been listening for a while and you've been thinking about joining our intensive online coaching and accountability groups, then head on over to coachingrewired.com for more details. That's coachingrewired.com. If you are looking for a virtual co-working space for other adults with ADHD, adultstudyhall.com is your place to go. We are getting closer. We might not hit our end of March goal, but we're getting really close to getting things open, up and ready for you to jump in and work with us. If you want to be a founder, founding members of our Adult Study Hall membership are going to be able to join at half off. So for only $9.99 a month. After our first 100 members join, it's only $19.99 a month. You're going to have access to around the clock work sessions. Many of those sessions will also be facilitated and guided with structure and themes. So go ahead, get on our list, go to adultstudyhall.com. And if that page takes you to an email sign-up page, go ahead and add your name to that list. And as soon as doors open, we will let you know. That's adultstudyhall.com, the place to boost your productivity with real-time accountability. That's adultstudyhall.com. All right, we are back. All right, so where we left off was 3 little ones. Everyone wants your attention all at the same time. You're exhausted. The reality of what you imagined to the reality of what was, or 2 very different realities.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. And I was saying that I've since learned that women with ADHD that don't know they have ADHD, they're often depressed or diagnosed with depression before they ever learn about their ADHD. And I just want to share this little quote from Kathleen Nadeau from Chesapeake ADHD Center of Maryland. She's in charge of the Learning and Behavioral Health Center.
And one of the authors of ADHD Friendly Ways to Organize Your Life, which is a super great book.
She's got lots of good literature out there. Yeah. And so this is from an article she wrote for Attitude magazine, or she's quoted in that article. She said, the pressure on women to be organized, self-controlled, to be the one who's keeping everybody else organized is a societal expectation that's very deeply ingrained. And so I wanted to point out that this is, even though my religion kind of emphasized this role, it's also a societal problem. It's not just this religion that probably is where I got that idea from. I think it's society wide. That she said women feel very much a failure if they can't keep their house in order. Mm-hmm. And that's the failure that I was feeling. Of course, it was compounded by my religious beliefs that was my eternal purpose, was to be a good mom, right? That was my goal. But it was this time that was kind of the catalyst moment. It's like, I'm not happy and I'm depressed. And my opinion of depression at the time was it's a lifestyle disease. There is way more complicated than that. And so I'm not going to oversimplify it now, but that was what I thought at the time. And so I thought, well, I need to change something, right? Like if this lifestyle, even though I believe that this is what I wanted and needed, it's not doing it for me. And so I need to change something. And I it was about that time where I met Brene Brown through her literature. And the first thing I read of hers was her book. I thought it was just me, but it isn't.
That's one of her older ones. Yeah.
Yeah. But a great book. And it introduced me to this idea of shame and this idea of the ways that our limiting beliefs hold us back. And so I started challenging some of the beliefs that I had about myself and who I was supposed to be and what I was supposed to do. And I also decided that, like, I'm going to get myself out of depression. I'm going to write a book, right? Because everybody's writing a book nowadays. But I started this back then. So it was me first, right? I started doing this first. I was going to write a book. And I started learning about story structure because that's what we do when we have ADHD. We just throw ourselves completely wholeheartedly into our new interests. And I learned about the hero's journey. It's an archetype, character arc, I guess, that this person has a great challenge and they have to leave their normal world or their comfortable place and venture out into an unknown and become something different in order to overcome their internal obstacles, right? Okay, so I decided I had to go out of my normal world, but I didn't know how to do that until a job opportunity came up. So the local high school, they needed a science teacher. And guess what? I was qualified to be a science teacher. So I applied for the job. I was offered the job and I had a moment of internal chaos, I guess, a battling against the self where I realized what I wanted didn't line up with what I was told I was supposed to want, and that I was different in a way that I still couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I knew I needed to do this. So I took the job. And teaching is not a job for wimps. It's a very intense and difficult job. And so that first year, I mean, it was a whirlwind. It was, there's definitely a learning curve.
And how old were your kids at the time?
So my kids were 3, 2, and 1.
Okay.
I always had thought I would never go back to work. I thought I would always be a stay-at-home mom, but I kind of had this additional stipulation that I would never go back to work until my kids were at least in school themselves, right? Because then they wouldn't even know I was gone, and I would still be home when they were home. And yeah, it didn't work out that way. They were little, and I still sometimes regret that because of the things I was taught growing up. Like it was really ingrained in us that young children need their mothers. And I still believe that. There's lots of research that supports that.
It also sounds like what was happening for you wasn't working or sustainable.
Right. Because I wasn't taking care of myself and I didn't understand myself well enough to know what I needed. And it's kind of like that. Everybody's heard the airplane analogy, like you got to put on your own oxygen mask before you can help someone else with theirs. I didn't have on my oxygen mask. I didn't even know that I had a breathing problem. And so it was something that was necessary for me. But it was still, there was a lot of emotional pain that went along with that decision because of my beliefs. So those beliefs, they started to change, and it was a very slow process. I think, so at this point, nobody in my life besides my husband knew that I was struggling with depression. I had a lot of shame around that too, because I felt that if I was spiritual enough, I wouldn't be depressed. If I was doing all the things that I'd been taught to do, if I was being obedient enough to God, if I was reading my scriptures and attending services and reaching out to others and sharing the message, if I was doing all those things, I should not be depressed.
Sounds like just like a breeding ground for shame.
Oh my gosh.
Because like you
so
can't even be human,
shame.
let alone have ADHD or depression.
Yeah. Yeah. So I taught science, and it was overwhelming. And I had a mentor. So every new teacher is assigned an experienced teacher to help them learn the ropes and help them understand how to do the job. And my mentor was openly atheist, very odd and hilarious. And I love him. I still am in contact with him, and he's just great.
What was your initial reaction when you found out that you were being paired with a mentor with someone who was openly atheist?
Ironically, I have always been extremely open and curious about people who are different from me.
Okay.
So for example, I have a mixed family, and I have cousins who are of all different races and nationalities. Like my dad came from a mix or a blended family of 11 brothers and sisters, and they went all over the country, and some of them have Samoan and Japanese husbands, and we have adopted twins that are Black. And so like I came from a family that was pretty diverse already. It was just, I had never interacted so directly with someone that was diverse in a way that conflicted with my religious beliefs.
Okay.
But I don't think I was as guarded as someone else might have been, because we had science in common. So we both love science, and that immediately bonded us. But even more so than just the science topic is it was only, I don't know if we had even been in school 1 week when he approached me during our teacher prep hour. So we weren't teaching classes at the moment, but he approached me and he called me out on it and said, "You're depressed, aren't you?" And it was just this like, that's probably the moment that took my breath away. That's the moment where I felt like I had been caught. But, and he must have noticed the reaction in me, because I kind of got this deer in the headlights look and like didn't know what to say. And he's like, "It's okay. I'll help you. I've been there too." And so that really changed. If I had any reservations about the goodness of human beings based on their beliefs, that really changed in an instant, because he, of all the other people I associated with, of all of the people in my religion and in my family, none of them had been so bold, and none of them had identified exactly what I was going through and been like, "I'm going to get you through this." And so throughout that time, that first year, he really coached me, not just on how to teach science, but on how to get through depression and how to just hang in there on the days where I kind of went down the rabbit hole. And he was there for me as a friend that I would never have expected to have. And so he was my teacher and my mentor that first year. The second year, I became a teacher and a mentor to my students. And I really was doing well at teaching. But unfortunately, I was still so tired. I mean, you can imagine teaching is a very demanding job. There's so much organization and planning and just keeping track of things and grading and assignments. I mean, the mental load is almost unfathomable. Some people now, after 2020, I think people are appreciating teachers a little more, like, whoa, they do a lot. But the demands on me were making it really difficult to manage my health and other conditions that I learned. And so this whole time, the more I taught and the more I became fond of this teaching job, I kind of got like extra motivated that I really want to take care of my health. I want to feel better so I can keep teaching.
You recognized that it was getting in your way.
Yeah. Something was there, something that was causing my fatigue and my inconsistency in energy levels and my, like problems with sleep, all this stuff. And so I went to dozens more doctors trying to figure out what's wrong. And we did find a few things. I mean, I found out I have an allergic condition called EOE, or eosinophilic esophagitis. It's an allergic, like a swallowing thing. It's hard to eat. And I found out, I mean, I always knew I had trouble with maintaining my blood glucose, or blood sugar, as some people call it. But the real problem is I just can't remember to eat.
When you were saying earlier about how here you are like studying nutrition and you can't remember to eat, to me that sounds so ADHD. It's very similar to me teaching people how to do all this planning and time management. And I sometimes also have difficulties with planning and time management, right? It's like, you know exactly what to do. And that's what ADHD is. It's challenges with performing, with doing the thing that you know you need to do.
Yes. And having now been diagnosed with ADHD, and
what was that like, getting diagnosed? Because didn't you have, if I recall from our first conversation, didn't you like see a doctor that you saw like when you were a kid or something? Like,
yeah, so that actually happened during this time. So my second year of teaching, I was really enjoying it, but I still had this fatigue and I didn't know what was causing it. And I kind of did the rounds with doctors in the medical sector again. And there was a time that I went to an endocrinologist, so a person that studies hormones and the effects on the body. And I just had like this deja vu moment, and like looking around his office, like I've been here before. And I realized I had been in that very office with my mom when I was maybe 15. And he had told me everything looks good, like the blood work's good, you're normal. Maybe it's anxiety. And at that time, and for whatever reason, my mom was very unwilling to consider like mental health issues. I think that's been a shift culturally. Like there's older generations that it's just not a thing, right? Like mental health is something, it's just personal. Like you just need to be tough and get over it, whatever. So she rejected that. And that was so being in the same office and realizing, oh my gosh, like I've been chasing these diagnoses. I've been trying to find out what's physically wrong with me. And I didn't know what to make of that experience, because sure enough, the doctor came back out. He's like, blood work looks good. Everything's fine. You're normal. right?
We'll emphasize the air quotes for the podcast listeners.
Thank you. Yes, normal. We're normal, guys. Everybody, we're all normal. Because there's nothing that is observable to the human eye. Because we look at you and you are a young, beautiful young woman. You got a job, you got a husband, you got kids. Like you look fine. You should be fine. But I wasn't fine. I was not fine. And I was so tired. I actually ended up resigning from this job that I loved because I felt I could not keep up.
Wow. Let's do this. Let's take a really quick break and we'll continue when we return. So we will be right back. Support for ADHD Rewired comes from our patrons. Check us out at adhdrewired.com/Patreon, where there's a level for everyone. If you become a patron member, you'll find perks like ad-free episodes, early releases, monthly coaching, and more. I want to thank Joseph M., Laura W., and Yaharia L., and Carolyn R., who all became patrons this month. Ooh, I got two more. Joanna W. and Danielle A. No, make it three more. And Amanda W. Welcome all of you who became patrons this month. I so appreciate your support. I want to welcome all of you to our Patreon community. So what about those perks? Well, Patreon members who contribute at the $25 a month level can join me for our group coaching call every fourth Tuesday of the month at 2 p.m. Central. If you're listening to this episode before 2 p.m. on the day it came out, that means our monthly group coaching call is today. Yep, that is today at 12 p.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Central, 3 p.m. Eastern for our monthly coaching call. It's a great way to get a taste of group coaching. And at just $5 a month, you can get ad-free episodes in a separate RSS feed. The $5 a month level also includes other high-tech and low-tech solutions to supercharge your productivity. Because who doesn't love trying something new? However, if you don't mind the ads and you still want to show a bit of financial support because you find value in every episode, you can contribute any amount, including an amount starting at just $3 a month. And don't forget, all levels include being able to connect with the other members of our awesome Patreon community. No matter the pledge, I am grateful for any contribution you are able to give. And if you're not in a place right now where you can support us financially, that's okay. Because you're here listening, I want to let you know I appreciate you too. Find out more about our Patreon community and perks for each level at adhdrewired.com/Patreon, or just click on the Patreon tab at the top of the page at adhdrewired.com. And thanks. The ADHD Rewired podcast family is growing. I started this podcast back in 2014. That's 7 years ago. Then, in January of 2018, I was joined by ADHD Essentials with Brendan Mahan. Brendan focuses on parents, educators, and other experts with ADHD, diving deep into the ways we can better take care of our families, our relationships, and ourselves with our ADHD brains. In last week's episode, Brendan shares his wall of awful model and gives us an overview on ways we can get past it. If you are also a parent or an educator or both, or you know you have ADHD, I'd really recommend listening to his podcast. Find out more about Brendan, his online parent coaching groups, and of course, ADHD Essentials by visiting ADHDessentials.com. Next to join the ADHD Rewired podcast family was Will Curb, the host of Hacking Your ADHD. Will launched his podcast back in October of 2019. Will gives us quick and digestible episodes with actionable tips so we can do more of the things that we want to do with our ADHD brains. I don't know about you, but adulting is really hard sometimes. Whether we're cleaning the kitchen, putting away clean laundry, or putting something on other than pajama pants, ADHD can get in the way. Will's episode called Masquerading as Adults explores those feelings of not feeling like an adult and how that interacts with our ADHD. Connect with Will or ask him questions by going to hackingyyouradhd.com. Who knows, you might hear Will answer your questions on one of his future episodes. Then, just this year, we were joined by ADHD Diversified with MJ Siemens. Right now, MJ continues to share her unique experiences, not only as someone who is visibly Asian with ADHD, but how it's affected the way she's had to navigate between different cultural expectations. Last Wednesday, MJ kept it real with a quick episode about how her ADHD brain kept her stuck in a mental traffic circle, which I think at some point or another has happened to all of us. Listen to her latest episode by going to adhddiversified.ca. And last but certainly not least, dropping this week on your favorite podcast player, the ADHD Lifestyle with Moira Mabin. Her show will focus on building a lifestyle that is more ADHD friendly. Moira is eager to share everything she's learned from being an educator, mom, and now one of the ADHD reWired coaches. All, of course, while navigating with ADHD. Visit her website at adhdfriendlylifestyle.com and get ready because her podcast launches this week. You can subscribe to all of the podcasts on the ADHD reWired Podcast Network on any of your podcast app or going to adhdrewired.com/podcast network. Thank you to all of our listeners for supporting us. All right, we are back. So right before the break, you were sharing that with everything that was going on and the overwhelm and everything that you ended up resigning from your teaching position.
I did. And it was really hard for me to do that because I loved teaching. I loved the kids and the interaction. And I also knew that one of the major causes of depression is social isolation, right? And so part of taking the job was to get out there and be connected with people that were interested in the same things as me. And so I really mourned that loss of association with my fellow teachers and with the students, and just being able to spend that time every day doing what I loved. And so I resigned, and we actually moved to a new home. It was better for me. It had more space outdoors. It had a big garden area, and it had big windows that let the sunshine in. And so we did still try to change what we could to improve my environment and help me be as happy as possible. When in gardening, like if your flowers are not doing well, you need to change something. You don't just blame the flowers. You change the environment in which the flowers are growing to help them grow best and be able to reach their potential. Yeah, so just becoming more mindful of my decisions and that they were mine and that I could choose how I was going to live my life and what I needed for me, and not looking left and right to everyone else to tell me what I need. And so my counseling, my therapy, that really helped. And it was through him actually that I did counseling with him for probably 5 months before I called and was just like, man, I am still having so much trouble with like the home stuff. And I felt so frustrated because like that's what got me to go teach. And like my whole story was because I felt so overwhelmed and so inadequate to deal with the stuff at home. And he's like, well, tell me more about it. And so I kind of explained, like, I'll go to start a load of laundry. And then I noticed that there's garbage on the floor. So I pick up the garbage. And then I remember I need to take the garbage out to the road. So I take the dumpster out to the road and I see the dogs and I need to feed the dogs and go feed the dogs. And then I realize I missed an appointment because I'm just, you do, because you're laughing. Um, and we all can relate to that, but we don't all know that for some people, that's life 24/7. For those of us with ADHD, we are distractible. We're inattentive. We have great intentions and incredible potential, but we don't have the executive function to make it happen. And so when I told him about my struggles with keeping up with the house and meal planning and groceries and all these things, he said, "That sounds like ADHD." And I just went, "No, no way. Like, there's no way I have ADHD." I kind of had that stereotype in my head, like the little boy that's over hyperactive. And that's all I knew of ADHD. I didn't know that it presents differently in women. I didn't know that I probably have inattentive type ADHD, which can come across as being very thoughtful and very like daydreaming a lot. But if you're interested, you can focus. Like, I loved school. I got straight A's. I flew completely under the radar until I was in an environment that overwhelmed my senses to the point that I couldn't cope and I didn't have the skills I needed to cope. And so I guess my message to other women and anyone out there really that is struggling and doesn't understand why they're having such a hard time, give yourself grace. You don't need it from any particular religion or God or anywhere else. Like, I mean, if that's part of what you do, that's fine. But there's so much more to understand about life and about yourself, that the more you understand, the less you can fear. The more you realize what's going on in your own head and your own body, the better you can take care of yourself and the people you love, and not feel like you're failing because you're not doing it a certain way. And so after this realization and this understanding that I had ADHD, and also immediately recognizing that in one of my own kids, like, oh yeah, okay, like this makes sense. And I need to do things differently, if not only for my own sake, but to help him not have the same experience that I have had. And so we at home, we've really focused on learning a growth mindset. We have some favorites like the...
Yeah, that was the timer that the 45-minute mark has come to this moment. So we're going to finish up this. Yeah, we're going to wrap this up, and we're just going to keep that all in because, it's good that we are listening to our cues instead of ignoring them.
Yes. Right. Well, and there's things, I mean, this little timer is one of the things I've learned that's helpful for me. And there's other things, planning, mindfulness, writing stuff down, connecting with other people like you, finding out you're not alone and it's not just you. And it's
not a moral failing or anything, an issue of faith. Hey, how is your relationship with your religion changed?
My religion is a part of my heritage. It will always be something that has influenced me. It will always influence my kids because their grandparents and cousins and friends are all a part of that religion. My personal faith has been transformed in ways that are really beneficial for me. I have more faith in myself now. My confidence is in my ability to adapt and change and be who I am and not just who everyone else wants me to be. And so faith is a little bit more of a a little less of an organized religion thing and more of a personal thing.
Sounds very humanistic.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm learning all kinds of new words like that. I would say one thing that's been hard about that transition is this organization explicitly tells its membership not to look for information outside of the provided sources and the approved sources. And so I feel like I would have found out more about myself and I would have been able to better help myself sooner if I hadn't been so afraid to look for information. And so I would caution anyone to never let someone tell you what to think. Don't believe things just because you're told to believe them. Look for the evidence. Make sure your decisions are evidence-based. And don't be afraid to change your opinion either. I had to tell my science students that all the time. Like, they would go into an experiment with an idea of how they thought it was going to turn out. And if it didn't turn out that way, a lot of them were just so disappointed and so confused and so like, what did I do wrong? And I'm like, you didn't do anything wrong. You're learning. Like, you learned, and it's different than what you thought it was going to be. But it's more about the process and not so much about the results.
Erika Hopkins, thank you so much for sharing your story. It's really a great discovery story, transformational, I think, in so many ways. And you're still kind of early on your journey too. So it's kind of exciting, huh?
Yeah, for sure. I'm excited to see what's next.
Well, what are you most excited for?
I just feel more free. I feel more adventurous and more like myself, more ready to try new things and do things different, not so constrained by cultural expectations or societal expectations. It's more like, I think that I have a story to share. And going back to that whole book,
yeah.
I'm going to write a book idea. I have written a book. I'm finishing it, and I hope that it will be inspiring to a lot of people, and that it will just make the world a better place. That's what I want to do.
Let us know when that book comes out.
Yeah, I will for sure. Thank you.
All right, Erika Hopkins, thank you so much. And thanks for sharing your story. And we will catch everyone next time.
Thank you.
This is Eric Tivers. Thank you for listening, and congratulations for making it to the end. ADHD Rewired is more than just a podcast. We are a community focused on learning, growing, and connection. The website is adhdrewired.com. You can find summaries and additional resources for each episode. You can apply to our free and secret Facebook community. You can learn more about ADHD Rewired's intensive online video-based coaching and accountability groups, and sign up for my email newsletter to get exclusive content you won't get anywhere else. It's all at adhdrewired.com. While you're there, click the Patreon button. If you're a regular listener and you're still listening to my voice, consider making a monthly contribution by becoming a patron through our Patreon page. If you are able to financially support my work, it would mean a lot. This show is free to listeners, but it is not free to produce. And patrons get really cool perks. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Tivers. You can like our Facebook page at facebook.com/ADHD Rewired. If you're a coach, therapist, or related professional, connect with me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/Eric Tivers. You can also subscribe to ADHD Rewired on YouTube. And you can subscribe to ADHD Rewired on YouTube and see select interviews and some other videos I've posted. Podcasts change lives. You can make a difference in someone's life by spreading the word about this podcast. Mention it in your online communities on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, or wherever you hang out online. And be sure to share it with your friends and your family and your clients, as well as your coaches, therapists, and doctors. And if you're a coach, therapist, doctor, or ADHD support group leader, and you would like a pack of podcast postcards to hand out, you can request those at my website, adhdrewired.com. And if you're a member of CHAD or any other ADHD support group, please be sure to tell them about this podcast. You can even show them how to download it on their phone. You know, you might be the person that turns somebody on to a podcast for the very first time. And if you really love this episode, please consider hitting share on your podcast player. I'm only one person, and I count on you to help me spread the message. One of the biggest things that you can do to support this podcast and to help other people discover it is to leave an honest rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or any other podcast app that accepts ratings and reviews. And don't forget to hit subscribe on this podcast on your podcast app so new episodes are automatically pushed to your favorite podcast app. Looking for more ways to listen and learn? Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/ADHD rewired. Not sure where to start? In no particular order. Check out Atomic Habits by James Clear, The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk, 10% Happier, and Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics. These are both by Dan Harris. Change Your Questions and Change Your Life by Marilee G. Adams. The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. Procrastinate on Purpose by Rory Vaden. The Four Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin. Do you have trouble asking for help? Listen to The Art of Asking by Amanda Palmer. It's one of the best produced audiobooks I've ever heard. If you're looking for something a little bit more, say, magical, I unexpectedly fell in love with the Harry Potter series. And I don't usually listen to those kinds of books, and I loved it. And of course, if you haven't yet boarded the Brene Brown bus yet, check out Brene Brown's books, starting with The Gifts of Imperfection, Daring Greatly, Rising Strong, The Power of Vulnerability. And if you're an entrepreneur or leader in any capacity, check out her 2018 book, Dare to Lead. And Brene still is my most wanted guest, so if you know Brene, and you would be so kind to make that connection for me, I would be really, really grateful. You know who else I would like to have on the show? You. Click the podcast tab at adhdrewired.com and then click the Be a Guest button at the top of that page and schedule a 15-minute pre-interview. This is Eric Tivers, reminding you to keep learning, keep growing, and keep connecting. Self-care is not selfish, and no matter what gets done or doesn't get done, at the end of the day, you are still enough. And no matter how hard it feels, we can do hard things. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next week.